I never imagined I would find myself in a situation like this. My name is John, and I've been married to Sarah for 5 years. For most of that time, I thought we had a solid, stable relationship. We shared dreams of the future, including the hope of starting a family one day. We navigated the ups and downs together, supporting each other through life's challenges and finding comfort in the small, everyday routines that come with marriage. I work for a tech firm, and not too long ago, I managed to secure a major contract with a company in California. It felt like a significant achievement in my career, something I had worked toward for a long time. I was excited to share the news with Sarah, thinking that maybe the success was the push we needed to finally take the next step in our lives and start the family we had talked about. But beneath the surface, something was beginning to unravel. A week before I landed the contract, Sarah and I went on a camping trip with my boss, Mark. At first, it seemed like a great opportunity for us to unwind and for me to strengthen my relationship with Mark outside of work. But when we returned home, something had changed. Sarah seemed distant, her usual warmth replaced with a cold, detached demeanor. She was snappy, and her patience with me seemed to have vanished overnight. At first, I told myself it was just fatigue from the trip or stress from her own work. But as days passed, her behavior became increasingly difficult to ignore. It felt like she was pulling away from me, and no matter how hard I tried to bridge the gap, she remained distant. One evening, while I was doing laundry, I noticed something that made my heart drop. As I was sorting through the clothes, I found a pair of her panties in the hamper, but they didn't look right. There was a stain on them that set off alarm bells in my head. The odor was unmistakable, and it didn't take long for me to realize what it was. My mind immediately went to the worst possible scenarios. I tried to dismiss the thought, telling myself there could be a reasonable explanation, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The pit in my stomach grew, and I couldn't shake the sense that everything was unraveling before my eyes. After that discovery, I felt like I was living in a nightmare, my mind racing with a million horrible thoughts. I couldn't just sit back and do nothing while doubts ate away at me. With a business trip already planned for the West Coast, I figured this might be my opportunity to find out what was really going on. Unsure of what to do, I reached out to a divorce attorney named Grace. I wasn't sure if Sarah was cheating, but I needed to be prepared. I explained everything to Grace, hoping she could provide some clarity or advice. She listened patiently, her expression one of sympathy mixed with professionalism. "Do you have any proof that she's cheating?" she asked, her tone direct. I shook my head. "Not yet," I admitted, "but I need to know the truth, and if she is, I want out." Grace nodded, explaining that if I wanted to pursue a divorce based on infidelity, we'd need solid proof, photos, videos, anything that could confirm my suspicions. She suggested hiring a private investigator and advised me to start gathering evidence discreetly. The idea of spying on Sarah felt like a betrayal in itself, but I knew I had no other choice. I needed to protect myself and prepare for whatever truth I was about to uncover. Before leaving for my business trip, I met with the investigator Grace had recommended. His name was Ethan, and he had a calm, reassuring presence. He showed me how to install a tracking app on Sarah's phone, which would let me monitor her location without her knowing. He also gave me a small voice recorder to hide in her purse, explaining that it could capture any conversation she might have while I was away. It felt sneaky, underhanded even, and as I set everything up, a part of me felt ashamed. But I pushed that feeling aside, reminding myself that I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The day I left, Sarah drove me to the airport. She kissed me goodbye, and we exchanged the usual promises to call and keep in touch. But something about her felt off. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and her affection felt forced, like she was going through the motions. Later that evening, after I had settled into my hotel, I called her. We chatted briefly, but then she mentioned something that set off alarm bells in my head. "I'm working at a party at Mark's place tonight," she said casually. "One of the waitresses bailed, and Mark asked me to fill in. The pay is good, and with school starting soon, I could really use the extra cash." My stomach tightened, Mark was my boss, and he hadn't mentioned anything about hosting a party. I tried to keep my voice steady, even though my mind was racing with suspicion. "All right," I said, forcing a smile she couldn't see. "Just be careful, and let me know how it goes." She promised she would, but after hanging up, the uneasy feeling lingered. I immediately called Ethan. "She's working a party at Mark's house," I said, my voice tense. Ethan assured me that he and his team would monitor her and report back if they saw anything suspicious. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind stuck on what could be happening at Mark's house. I knew I wouldn't rest until I had answers. The next morning, I called Sarah again, but there was no answer. My gut told me that she had stayed the night at Mark's, and I couldn't get the thought out of my head. Later that afternoon, Ethan sent me an email. My hands trembled as I opened it, already fearing the worst. Inside the email were a series of photos. As I scrolled through them, my heart sank. There was Sarah at Mark's party, caught in compromising positions with not just Mark, but two other men, people I had considered friends. My hands shook as I stared at the images, unable to believe what I was seeing. The woman I had shared my life with, the woman I trusted more than anyone, was living a double life. My world felt like it was collapsing, and the pain was unlike anything I had ever felt. The reality of it all hit me like a ton of bricks. I knew then that our marriage was over. The next morning, after barely any sleep, I checked the tracking app again. Sarah's phone was still at Mark's house, confirming my worst fear. She had spent the night there. Another email came through from Ethan, and this one was worse. It contained more photos of Sarah, this time involved with multiple men, including Mark's son, Chris. These weren't strangers. They were people I worked with, people I had trusted and shared moments with. I stared at the images, feeling anger and heartbreak wash over me in waves. The betrayal was too deep, too raw. There were even more men in the photos. Two guys I didn't recognize, who Ethan later identified as friends of Chris. I couldn't comprehend how far this had gone. The woman I loved, the one I had thought I knew inside and out, was entangled in a web of lies and deceit that I never saw coming. The reality of it all was shattering. After wrapping up my business on the West Coast, I booked the earliest flight home. I was finished with this trip, done pretending like everything was okay. When I arrived at the house, Sarah's car wasn't in the driveway, and as I expected, her phone was still at Mark's place. Exhausted and emotionally drained, I walked inside and called Grace, letting her know I was ready to move forward with the divorce. Later, I called Sarah. She picked up, her voice breathless, and I instantly knew she was lying. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Where are you?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "Oh, I'm at home, just catching up on some things before school starts." The ease with which she lied, as if it meant nothing, made my blood boil. "I see," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Well, I'm done with work out here, and I'm heading home." "Oh, that's great," she said, her tone suddenly sweet. "I've missed you so much. Call me when you land, and I'll pick you up from the airport." "No need," I replied coldly. "I'll grab a taxi." I hung up before she could respond. For the first time, it didn't bother me that I hadn't said, "I love you." Normally, it was something I never missed, but this time, those words felt meaningless. I sat in silence, reflecting on how we had reached this point. The woman I had loved so deeply was now someone I barely recognized. The lies, the betrayal. It was all too much. I couldn't stand the thought of looking at her, much less sharing a life with her. When I finally got home, Sarah was still gone. I took a long shower, trying to wash away the disgust I felt. Not just toward her, but at myself for letting it get this far without confronting her. I felt almost numb, just going through the motions. Later that evening, she walked in, looking startled to see me. "Hey, babe," she greeted, leaning in to kiss me. I turned my head, letting her kiss my cheek instead. She pulled back, confused. Is everything okay? No, not really, I replied, my tone cold. I'm not feeling great. Probably just jet lagged. I'll be crashing on the futon tonight. Her eyes widened, surprised by my distant behavior. On the futon? Why? Where are you going? She asked, a note of concern in her voice. I've got a dinner meeting, I said flatly. Dinner meeting? She repeated, suspicion creeping in. Are you meeting someone special? I let out a bitter laugh. If you're asking if I'm cheating on you, the answer is no. I've never cheated on you and never plan to. Can you say the same? Her face paled and she stammered. What do you mean? I stared at her, waiting for her to confess, to say something, but all she did was fumble for words. How was that job at Mark's house? I asked, probing. She smiled, trying to play it off casually. Oh, it went fine. You know, it was pretty fun, actually a bit of a challenge, but I got through it. I nodded, my voice dripping with sarcasm. I'm sure it was. She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. Glancing at my watch, I said abruptly, I should get going, and stood up, grabbing my keys. Without another word, I left her standing there, confused and panicked. I knew she would probably call Mark, desperate for answers, but she wouldn't get any from me, not yet. I drove straight to Grace's office. I had enough evidence to destroy Sarah's life, but I didn't want to act recklessly. Grace reminded me to keep things calm, to act normal until everything was finalized, but it felt impossible. How could I look Sarah in the eye, knowing what I knew? After leaving Grace's office, I realized there was no turning back. I was done with Sarah, ready to move forward with a divorce. Pretending like everything was normal, though, was going to be tough. When I got home that night, Sarah was sitting on the couch, clearly waiting for me. How was your meeting? She asked, trying to sound casual, but there was something in her voice, maybe nervousness or fear. I couldn't tell, and honestly, I didn't care. It went fine, I said curtly, avoiding eye contact. I'm going to bed. Without waiting for a response, I headed to the guest room, the place I had already decided would be where I slept from now on. She followed me to the door, her footsteps hesitant. Are you sleeping in here now? She asked, her voice shaky. Yeah, I replied flatly. I'm still not feeling great, so I'll take the futon. Is that a problem? Oh, no, I guess not, she mumbled. I was just hoping we could, spend some time together. You've been gone for a few days. The thought of being close to her made my skin crawl. I couldn't stand the idea of her touching me after what I'd seen in those photos. Not tonight, I said, brushing her off. Maybe tomorrow. She gave a half-hearted nod and backed away, clearly confused. I could see the wheels turning in her mind. She knew something was off, but I wasn't about to lay my cards on the table just yet. The next morning, I woke up early, grabbed my resignation letter, and made myself a cup of coffee. Sarah's purse was sitting on the counter, and I saw my chance to grab the audio recorder I had hidden inside. I downloaded the recording of the call she'd made the previous night, no doubt to Mark, and headed out the door before she woke up. At the office, I went straight to packing up my things. I couldn't bear to be around these people any longer, especially Mark. I wanted to be out of there before anyone noticed, but of course, Mark showed up just as I was finishing. What's going on, John? He asked, eyeing the boxes in my office. I pulled out 2 envelopes, one with the signed contract for my recent trip, and the other with my resignation letter. This is the signed contract, I said, and this is my resignation. Effective immediately. Mark's face shifted from confusion to shock. Resignation? What are you talking about? Why are you leaving? I need you. I couldn't believe the nerve of him, standing there acting like he had no idea why I was quitting. You really don't know? I asked, my voice cold. You think I'm oblivious? I found out what's been going on and I'm done. I can't work here anymore. Mark's expression darkened, but then, to my disgust, he smirked. Oh, so that's what this is about, your wife, John. Come on. She was more than willing. Don't let this ruin your career. She'll come back to you once she's had her fun. I stared at him, my blood boiling. Are you seriously suggesting I just accept this? I asked, incredulous. How long have you been screwing her? Mark's smirk grew wider. First time was at the camping trip. Remember that day you and the others went out skiing? She came on to me in your tent, said I was bigger than you, and practically begged me to take her. I felt the bile rise in my throat. So that's why he had sent me on that pointless errand during the trip. He wanted me out of the way so he could screw my wife in our tent. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. And that waitress gig at your party? I asked, my voice shaking with anger. That was just a cover, wasn't it? So you could get her into bed. He shrugged, not even bothering to deny it. Yeah, what of it? I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, stopping the audio recording I had started earlier. Thanks for confirming everything, I said icily. I'm done here. Mark's smirk vanished as he realized what I had just done. Wait a minute, he stammered. You can't use that recording. We'll see, I replied, grabbing my things. As I walked out of Mark's office, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. The power had shifted, and he knew it. I didn't care about his threats anymore. I was done being manipulated and lied to. With my resignation letter submitted, I headed straight to HR, handed in the paperwork, and walked out of that building for the last time. When I got home later that day, I was dreading the possibility of running into Sarah, but of course, she was there, sitting on the couch, waiting for me. The moment I walked in, she stood up, looking anxious. Hey, you're home early, she said, trying to sound casual, but there was a nervous edge to her voice. How was work? I didn't bother answering her question directly. Instead, I walked straight into the kitchen, setting my briefcase down on the table. We need to talk, I said, my tone cold and hard. Sarah's face went pale. About what? She asked, but I could tell from the tension in her voice and the way her eyes flicked downward that she knew exactly what I was referring to. Without saying a word, I pulled out the photos Ethan had sent me, pictures of her and Mark at that party, and laid them out on the table. Her eyes widened as she looked down at them. She covered her mouth with her hand and gasped. What the hell, John, she stammered, tears welling up instantly. Where did you get these? That doesn't matter, I replied, my voice icy. What matters is that you've been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back. And now, I have all the proof I need. She started crying, tears streaming down her face in torrents. I can't explain, she sobbed, reaching for my arm, but I pulled away from her touch. Please, John, it was a mistake. A mistake? I repeated, feeling the anger boil up inside me. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk on your way home. This, I gestured to the photos spread out on the table. This was no mistake. It was a choice, Sarah. Over and over again, you chose to betray me. She fell to her knees, grabbing at my pant leg, her cries growing louder. Please, John, I don't want to lose you. I still love you. It didn't mean anything. It was just a stupid fling. I shook my head, stepping back to force her to let go. Love, I said, bitterness dripping from my words. Do you even know what that means? If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You destroyed everything we had. She tried to stand, wiping her tears, but panic was clear in her eyes. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice trembling. Are you going to leave me? I crossed my arms, keeping my tone calm despite the storm raging inside. I've already filed for divorce, Sarah. You'll be served later today. Her face went white as if the word divorce was a death sentence. Divorce? She whispered, her voice breaking. Yes, I said firmly. Divorce. And I'll be citing adultery. I've got more than enough evidence. And there's no way you're going to fight this. She collapsed into a chair, staring blankly at the table as tears streamed down her cheeks. Please, John, don't do this, she begged. I can change. We can fix this. I'll never do anything like this again. I swear, I don't want to lose you. It's too late for that, I said, my tone cold and final. You already lost me the moment you decided to cheat on me. You made your choice. Now, you have to live with the consequences. She sobbed uncontrollably, and for a moment, a pang of sadness hit me, watching her break down like that. But I reminded myself of the photos, the lies and the betrayal. She had done this to herself, and I wasn't going to comfort her anymore. There's one more thing, I said, cutting through her cries. I want your wedding ring back, and you're going to stop using my last name. You don't deserve either. She looked up at me, horrified, but she knew I was serious. Slowly, she slipped the ring off her finger and placed it on the table. John, please, she started again, but I was done listening. I'm leaving for a while, I said, grabbing my keys. When I get back, I expect you to be gone. Pack up your things and take whatever you want. But if you're still here when I return, I'll have the police escort you out. I saw fear flash in her eyes as she realized this was really happening. I turned and walked out, ignoring her cries behind me. It was over. There was no saving this, no going back. She had betrayed me in the worst way possible, and I was done. After leaving the house, I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to clear my head. I couldn't stand being in that house anymore, knowing everything Sarah had done. I pulled into a parking lot and sat in my car, letting the reality sink in. My marriage was over. The life I had planned with Sarah was gone, but I knew I had to move on and couldn't let myself fall into despair. I grabbed my phone and called Grace, letting her know everything was ready for the papers to be served. She assured me it would happen that afternoon. The process was in motion, and there was no turning back. Later, when I returned home, I half expected to find Sarah still there, clinging to some hope that I'd change my mind. But when I opened the door, the house was eerily quiet. Her car was gone, and there were a few empty spaces where her belongings had been. She had taken my warning seriously. I breathed a sigh of relief, knowing I wouldn't have to face another emotional confrontation that day. For the next few days, things were strangely peaceful. Sarah didn't try to contact me, and I focused on wrapping up the loose ends of our marriage. Grace filed the divorce papers, and Sarah didn't contest them. I think she knew she didn't stand a chance, especially with the evidence I had. But just when I thought I was in the clear, Mark started leaving threatening voicemails. He wasn't handling the fallout well, and his ego couldn't take that I wasn't backing down. John, you better drop this lawsuit, or I'm coming over and we'll settle this like men, he growled in one message. I just smiled and forwarded it to Grace, who passed it on to the authorities. His arrogance knew no bounds, but I wasn't intimidated. I had the law on my side. A few days later, there was a knock at my door. Peeking through the window, I saw Mark, his son Chris, and a couple of other guys from the office standing there, looking angry. I knew this wasn't a friendly visit. I quickly grabbed my pistol from the gun safe, tucking it into my waistband just in case things escalated. I wasn't about to let them intimidate me in my own home. I cracked the door open just enough to confront them. What do you want? I asked coldly, already knowing the answer. We want you to drop this lawsuit, Mark snarled. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I pulled the door open a little wider, making it clear I wasn't backing down. Not going to happen, Mark, I said firmly. Now, unless you want to end up in jail, I suggest you get off my property. He took a step closer, trying to push his way in. You're not going to shoot us, John. You don't have the guts. I pulled the pistol out just enough for him to see the barrel. You want to find out? I asked, my voice steady. Mark hesitated, realizing I wasn't bluffing. Just then, the sound of sirens filled the air, and I saw flashing red and blue lights approaching from down the street. Looks like your time's up, I said with a smirk. Before Mark and his crew could react, 2 police cars pulled up, and officers quickly exited with weapons drawn. Hands up! Get on the ground! One of the officers shouted, his gun trained on Mark. Mark and the others froze, then slowly complied, dropping to their knees as the officers cuffed them. One of the cops approached me, glancing at the pistol in my hand. Sir, I need you to put the weapon down. I did as he asked, setting the gun on the kitchen counter. These men violated a restraining order, I explained. I want to press charges. The officer nodded, pulling out the paperwork I had given them earlier. We'll take it from here. Do you have a license for that firearm? I showed him my concealed carry permit, and after a quick glance, he handed it back to me. All right, sir. You're good to go. Just be careful. I will, I said, relieved as they escorted Mark and his crew off my property. I knew this wouldn't be the last time I'd have to deal with him, but for now, I was safe. In the months that followed, life slowly began to return to normal. I started a new job at Empire, a company run by an old friend, and threw myself into my work. It was a welcome distraction from everything that had happened, and I found that I actually enjoyed the work more than I ever had at Mark's firm. The divorce went through without a hitch. Sarah didn't fight it, probably knowing she had no ground to stand on. She moved out of town, and as far as I knew, she hadn't tried to contact anyone from our old life. I didn't care where she ended up. What did surprise me was a lawsuit.